Great. It is 5:02 and I am calling the Quality of Life Committee meeting to order on this day, June 17th. So if we could get a roll call and make sure we have a quorum, that would be great.
Councillor Romero Worth.
I am here.
Councillor Rivera.
I'm here.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez.
Here.
Councillor Villarreal.
Present.
Councillor Garcia.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Great. Then we will move to approval of our agenda. Are there changes from staff?
Sorry, no, there's not.
Okay. Changes from the committee?
Madam Chair,
Councillor Villarreal.
I have a change. I'd like to postpone item 6D as in dog, which is the item stating the resolution supporting the closure of West San Francisco Street and establishing a framework for the closure of other streets. And the reason why, it's not because I don't want to hear this item. We've been anxiously waiting to understand this particular item, but I believe it was improperly noticed. The staff uploaded the resolution, the revised resolution, to our packet material and to the website yesterday at 5 p.m. While that I've heard might be acceptable, the problem is the caption still remains the same, which is not the topic that we will be discussing specifically. I think that's unacceptable. So I would like to have, I'd like to postpone this item. I don't think 24 hours is enough time for the public to be able to see that. It adds to the lack of transparency for community members and for myself, especially for a topic that's been very, I don't want to say controversial, but it has been something that has elicited a lot of curiosity, emotion, and such. So I'd like to make that motion to postpone that item.
All right, Councillor Villarreal, I have part of the reason why I was late getting on this call is that I have been talking to the city clerk and the city attorney's office about your concern. My understanding is that because the only thing that's required by the Open Meetings Act is that we caption the item that we'll be discussing 72 hours in advance. And according to the city clerk's office, the caption on the agenda and the agenda were properly noticed. They were put out on Thursday, June 11th, well in advance of the 72-hour requirement. The caption, as you note, has changed a little bit, but it has, it's not like, so the first caption said the closing of San Francisco Street and other, creating a structure for other street closures. The resolution that's actually in front of us takes away the naming of a particular street. So it's not that we have changed anything. We may have narrowed, we said we're talking about green and blue, and now we took away green, but blue's still there, and we're still talking about blue. So it was properly noticed and according to the Open Meetings Act. So we have done, everything has been completely according to the rules.
Well, I appreciate you looked into the issue with legal. However, I still don't think the caption reflects what item we're actually hearing tonight. And we're not specifically focused on San Francisco Street. We were looking, well, according to the most recent version, we were looking at other streets generally. And I don't think that that really reflects what we were supposed to be discussing or what was noticed previously. So I'm still going to move to take the item off for postponement. I still think we have opportunities to be able to review this next week, whether it's in Public Works and also at the council meeting. So I'm just proposing this out and seeing what my colleagues will do.
Okay, and I just, one final note, just because it doesn't say San Francisco Street anymore, doesn't mean, I mean, it does say establishing a framework for the closure of streets to vehicular traffic and a certain period, for a certain period during 2020. So, you know, San Francisco Street could still be a street that, you know, under the guidelines of the resolution could be closed. So again, we, you know, I don't think we have noticed the public that we're talking about the closures of streets. Just because we took away the name of one street doesn't mean that we're not in compliance. So I guess we'll see if you have a second to remove this item from the agenda.
Madam Chair, I'll second it for discussion purposes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion?
Madam
So,
Chair, oh,
I
I'm
want-
sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Garcia.
I want to make a comment. I wholeheartedly agree with Councilor Villarreal's concerns in regards to getting the packet information extremely late. I find it unacceptable for us to get that information 24 hours prior, especially on a case, as Councilor Villarreal has mentioned, that constituents and expressing their concerns, whether it's in favor or against, since Wednesday, or if not earlier. And for me to not be able to review the resolution and provide feedback to them is unacceptable. And I know you mentioned it's not out of compliance with the Open Meetings Act, but I think it sets precedent, and a very dangerous precedent that we want to steer away from. It should be unbecoming, and I understand that sometimes there are challenges, but to send us a resolution 24 hours prior to us reviewing it, and the public not even having sufficient time to review it, to me, we should not allow that as a council. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Is there other discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I just was curious. So the caption that we have right now is the caption that was posted on Thursday, correct?
On our agenda, yes. It's the caption we have is consideration of resolution number 2020-blank, a resolution supporting the closure of West San Francisco Street and establishing a framework for the closure of other streets to vehicular traffic for a certain period during 2020.
Okay, and so,
And the title that's actually on the resolution that we got is a resolution establishing a framework for the closure of streets to vehicular traffic for a certain period during 2020. Now, again, I talked to the city attorney's office. Erin is on another call. She was going to try to jump onto this one. It looks like she's unable to get away. But essentially, you know, what we said was we will be talking about green and blue. And we let the public know that well in advance of the 72 hours that's required. Now we're saying we're not going to talk about green. We're just going to talk about blue, although green might still happen. But blue is what we're going to focus on. And I completely understand the frustration with getting packet materials, but you know, not at the same time that the agendas are posted. That's, you know, something that it's just, you know, I think we're all under a lot of pressure to do a lot of things. And we did get it last night. It's 3 pages long. It took me maybe 10 minutes to read. And I think we all know from the emails that we've been receiving what we're talking about. And that's all that's required by the Open Meetings Act. It's not required. There are some municipalities that, you know, don't hand out their packets until the meeting, which, you know, I can't imagine functioning under that kind of a situation. And, you know, in an ideal world, we would get these things much sooner, but we have done nothing wrong under the Open Meetings Act.
okay, that's, thank you for that clarification. I think I both share the frustration and also want to talk about it. So I'm a little Yeah, I'm a little torn on the matter because I do agree that it would be nice for the public to have the opportunity to read this in advance, although I do have a lot of questions that I'm eager to have answered.
Well, and I think we
So that
can,
was all.
you know, hopefully in our discussion, this is not a public hearing. We can, you know, get into it a little bit and understand what the resolution is providing for and maybe get some clarity. We have staff who is on the call here on the Zoom meeting who can help provide us more information. And, you know, again, it was properly noticed as required under the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, all right, thank you, Councilor Romero Roth.
All right,
Madam
yes, Councilor Rivera.
If San Francisco Street can still be included as one of the closures, why remove it? Did staff give any reasoning?
I didn't get into that. I was strictly focused on the, you know, what it said when it was put on the agenda and what the actual resolution now says.
So this is the way the resolution was introduced, which created a lot of frustration, I think, among certain people within the city. So just curious as to why the change now, especially since those people are assuming that it's going to be what we're talking about tonight. And clearly,
Yeah, I mean, it's still a street that could be closed, but it's one of many streets that could be closed under the resolution if you meet the right guidelines that are laid out in that resolution. So there's that. Counselor, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Jesse does have his hand up. I wonder if he might help us provide clarity.
sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councilors. In regards to what was introduced, that language is subject to change. So I understand the concern from the public that West San Francisco Street was laid out in the introduction. However, at the point that it was introduced, we only had a very rough draft and didn't have a final version. So once we did have that final version, what we came back with was a more general version of the resolution and not specific to any particular street.
Councilor Rivera, I think you still have the floor.
Thank you. So though I support and understand Councilor Villarreal's motion, I guess I would rather discuss this and have it show up on Public Works with them just 2 days before City Council, before being able to have some kind of input on this. So unfortunately, that's where I'm coming from, but I do understand and share in the frustration.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
you know, what bothers me about all of this is that you just stated that we're trying to do a lot of things right now. And so therefore we should take the time to do things well. It's like, we don't necessarily have to follow the track that this is on. We can extend it for the time we need to make the right decisions. And that's what bothers me about this. We just decide, oh, that's our timeline. We have to follow it. We have to get this pushed through before we get to council all next week. Well, that's not really the case. We get to decide if that's the case. And I just want to be able to have more transparency and having these moments where we're like, oh my God, we have to get this done. And we need to do it right for the public, for the business owners, for ourselves. And that's why I wanted to postpone this. And it didn't mean that we wouldn't necessarily change other tracks down the way. It just bothers me that we think that we have this time frame, that we're all on the same time frame that we need to follow. And I understand the urgency for those of you that are listening, but we have to do things right at the city.
Thank you, Councilor. Just to be clear, we've done nothing wrong here. Although I realize it's frustrating getting these packet materials 24 hours. Yes, Councilor Rivera.
Councilor Villarreal, is your postponement until the next meeting, or is it just that we postpone it from our meeting and then it continues on its track?
Well, you know, ideally we'd postpone this so that we can actually hear it at our next meeting. But I realized we have this time frame a self-imposed timeline, if you will, or timeframe. Postponing it in case we were able to meet again through this committee, but realizing if it doesn't, then it can go through Public Works on Monday, and then we'd have discussions at council on Wednesday, if it stays on that track.
And that's what my concern is that how do we voice our concerns about the new resolution if we don't talk about it tonight? So how do we get our concerns out there if we're just going to move it forward? Because I guess staff could just put it forward as is to Public Works without any direction or comment or input from us.
Councilor Rivera, that's true. So in our process, as we have noted before, it's not linear. If we postpone this, then we're pretty much postponing our ability to weigh in on it as this committee, because it does go to Public Utilities, Public Works. If it is approved there, then it does move forward, and it doesn't need our approval to be heard at the council. And again, we were in compliance with the public, with the Open Meetings Act. Sorry, multitasking here.
Yeah,
Is
and
there-
the reason I say that is I have many concerns that I would like addressed before this makes it to Public Works.
All right, is there other discussion? We have a motion and a second to remove this item. If we could take a roll call, that'd be great.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera,
No,
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett Sanchez,
No,
Counselor Romero Worth.
No.
Motion does not pass.
All right, are there other changes to the agenda? Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
move to approve.
second,
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Can we have a roll call, please?
Counselor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes,
Counselor Rivera,
yes,
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
No.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion pass.
Okay, so now we are on to the minutes, well, wait, let me go back to the agenda. We need to do the approval of the consent agenda. Are there items that anybody wants to pull for the consent agenda?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
I'd like to pull item B as in boy for discussion. Item
Okay.
C, and since we didn't remove D, let's talk about D.
Great. Are there other items councilors would like to pull?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Garcia.
I would like to pull item A as well.
All right, so we have items A, B, C, D. Anything else?
Madam Chair, just for the record, I'd like to pull item D as well.
Okay, great.
Madam Chair, I'm also pulling D, although it's already been pulled.
All right. So with that, can we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended, which leaves just one item on it, item E?
Move for approval.
Second,
Can we have a roll call, please?
Counselor Rivera,
Yes,
Counselor Villarreal,
yes.
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes,
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, and then are there changes to the minutes for June 3rd, 2020? Is there a motion to approve?
move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
second,
Can we get a roll call?
Counselor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes,
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera, Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yep, yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, so with that, we will move to our consent agenda items. We will start with item A.
Madam Chair, I'm here to answer any questions, or I can provide a presentation, whatever the committee would like.
Counselor Garcia, you pulled this item, I believe. Would you like a presentation or did you have specific questions?
No presentation is necessary, Alexandra. I appreciate it, though. Couple quick questions. On page 42 of the annual action plan, it gives an end date of June 30th, 2021. Is that the end date when we plan to have the homeless shelter cease operations at Midtown?
Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, that is really just our contracting end date. So we want the contract to be in place for the duration of the year. We don't plan to be, well, we plan to be supporting some continued effort to house folks beyond having them at the shelter. But right now, the CARES funding that we have, which is what the amendment to the action plan is about, is of a 6-month, we figure we can partially fund the shelter for 6 months.
Okay.
And
And
also,
so,
Counselor Regina Wheeler, excuse me, is here too if you have any real specific questions about budget numbers, since she's been knee deep over there.
okay, thank you. So what you're saying is with this additional funding, we plan to have that transition out at the end of the calendar year, out of Midtown campus.
Well, I believe we will have spent it all. It's very, very hard at this point in time to make any plans because our world has turned upside down and we really don't know what it's going to look like in 3 months or 6 months. But part of the intention behind this contract and part of the reason that the New Mexico Coalition Done Homelessness was stepped up to do it, but also was asked, is because it gives us this 6-month strategic planning timeframe, so that we're able to really look at what do we need in the long term. I mean, I think one of the things that the shelter has shown us all is A, we can do this, and B, how helpful it is and how many lives. I think about 120 people have gone through the shelter and their lives were changed significantly because they did not have to try to stay safe or stay uninfected or be in a crowded place on the streets or recover from having either COVID or another illness. So I think if anything, it's been a great demonstration project. We're currently talking to all of the community partners and collaborators. So the County of Santa Fe, the DOH, Christus, everybody who's currently benefiting from this system, because prior to having this, if somebody had to leave the hospital, they either were put on the streets, not ready to be on the streets. I mean, nobody's ever ready to be on the streets, but still not fully well, or the hospital would just have to keep them. So I think we have a lot of momentum now, and I think there's a lot of buy-in that everything's moving so quickly, but we're really trying to work toward a collaborative solution so that at the end of 6 months, we have a plan. The city's not operating it. The city has handed it off to a network of partners, and we're able to look at this as a long-term solution to people who are in either precarious housing situations, or I'm looking beyond even the pandemic, or in a situation where they just need a temporary place to be stabilized.
Great, thank you for that thorough feedback. Next question I have is pertaining to the proposed budget, and I didn't really see the information in the packet, and I'm going off of information I saw in the last week's presentation regarding the support that would come on our end, and in particular the hiring of staff. So the proposed, and I think they were classified as front desk support or whatnot. So are those going to be new hires or existing City of Santa Fe employees that transition into those positions? How does that work?
Madam Chair, Councilor, this will be new employees, because the idea behind the CARES Act funding is that we can actually expand our capacity and take it out of the city's system. So we will be hiring new people. Currently, city staff is providing some of that function, and they will provide, the city will continue to support it for the next 6 months. But yeah, the idea is this is the first step away from the city running it.
Okay, and I think I see Wheeler with her hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia. Just to be clear, Director Ladd is correct that we will, the grant allows us to hire new staff that will be through a contract with the fiscal administrator of the grant. However, the front desk staff will continue to be city employees whose facilities are closed, giving them meaningful, productive work for the city. But yeah, a number of those positions will continue to be filled by city staff.
Okay, and I think you kind of got where I was looking at, because there are the two different, the staff that we would be able to hire through the funding of the grant, but then on the end where the funding comes from the city, that staff, we're going to be using existing staff for those positions. So
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, that helped to clarify. No additional questions, Madam Chair. Thank you, Alexandra and Regina, for the information.
Okay, great. Are there other questions from the committee on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilor Garcia, second by Councilor Villarreal. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilor Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
and Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Your motion passes.
Okay, Councilor Villarreal, I believe you pulled off item B.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see here. Just a quick question. So I was trying to rack my brain. We have an active conservation committee right now, don't we?
Yeah, so if I can, here's what's going on here. We do have a water conservation committee, which are, I believe, listed in the resolution. It's been a minute since I've looked at this. Let me see. There are 4 different resolutions that govern the Water Conservation Committee. And it gets a little complicated because they're spread from 2002 through 2016. So we wanted to reconstitute it, bring all of that into one resolution. And then also one of the big things that's being done here is making allowing for 3 2-year terms for members of the committee. And part of that is because the way it's structured now, we have too many people who all roll off together. We can have 5 vacancies all at once. And it's really hurts the committee's work because one, water being what it is, it takes a while first to recruit people, then to get them up to speed, and then to get them to be contributing committee members. It's just a long process. So we want to allow for a little bit more longevity, and we also want to, the way it's staggered now, we won't have so many roll off all at the same time. So that's the reason for doing this.
That makes sense. I was just trying to figure out, in each of those resolutions that were listed, each of them were establishing the Water Conservation Committee, or what was different about each of them?
So they the first one, of course, established it, and then I can't speak to the details. Maybe Christine Chavez is on this call if you want to know the details, but each of those subsequent resolutions asked the committee to do more. And so just to have a whole picture of how the committee works, you'd have to look at all 4 of them, and it's just, it's just not ideal. It'd be better if you only had to refer to one.
Right. Christine, did you want to say anything about it?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, No, I think Councilor Worth covered all of it. It's been in existence for quite some time. And so there's just been resolutions changing some of the experience that we were looking for. Another one that set term limits a couple years ago, but then we've had trouble, as Councilor Romero Worth indicated, with the transition periods. And so this is meant to just clarify all of those things and just have one resolution to reference.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for the clarity. I don't have any other questions.
All right, are there other questions on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Move to approve?
Second,
Okay, we have a motion by Councilor Villarreal, second by Councilor Cassett Sanchez. Can we have a roll call on approval of this item?
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Cassett Sanchez,
yes.
Councilor Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, with that, we will go on to item C. Councilor Villarreal, I believe you pulled this as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, because this would require a public hearing. So, and it's also contingent on getting the other resolution moving forward in some fashion or some, I'm not sure how it will be written as we change it, but this would be contingent, right, on the other resolution functioning? I mean, they kind of go hand in hand. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Counselor, it certainly could apply to that, but it also applies to the current sidewalk and parklet use that is not related to item D on the consent calendar tonight. So without regard to the success or failure of that, this is important for our restaurants that are in a position where they can expand their floor plan a little bit using sidewalks and parklets, which are also city property.
And maybe, Mr. Randall, you can explain the approval of sidewalks and parklets, and even I thought was parking spaces as well as being allowed right now.
Madam Chair, Counselor, yes, to my knowledge, it's approved through an obstruction permit by Public Works, and the parklets are actually the use of the parking places in front of a particular facility. Okay,
Just want to make that clarity known to the public too, that we already have the obstruction permit allowed that would what would allow for sidewalks and parklet options in order to utilize this liquor license expansion, correct?
Madam Chair, Counselor, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Move to approve?
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay, we got a motion by Councilor Cassett Sanchez, a second by Councilor Garcia. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councilor Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
and Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, now on to item D. What I'd like to do on this, I know that we have at least 3 counselors who pulled it, who will probably want to speak to it. We have a number of staff here to help us understand what's going on. And I'd like to start with Rich Brown, if that's okay, to give sort of the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, councilors. We recognize that the merchant and restaurant community's street closure idea and resolution we put forward for consideration has ignited curiosity, frustration, and fervent opposition and approval. Our idea is to create economic opportunities for businesses, restaurants, and merchants to increase their ability to make money and provide a food and shopping experience while we fully reopen. Our goal was not necessarily to place a stake in the ground for any particular street, but to create a nimble framework for street closures to put into action and provide some economic vibrancy after everyone's been sheltering in place for about 90 days. So our bigger framework really focuses on bringing people back to work, expanding outdoor dining options to bring people out to enjoy their favorite spots, helping merchants and restaurants make needed revenue to survive, keeping in mind that right now restaurants can only work at 50% capacity, and some are very tiny. Being quick and responsive for different types of street closure options, and also to adhere to state and city health protocols. One of the things we're doing right now is we're actually been handing out almost 30,000 protective coverings and masks, both to the city, to the visitor center, to the chambers, and to our food distribution. So we're looking at the health aspect, but we're also trying to figure out how to reopen safely and provide some economic activities for those businesses that they want to survive and they want to be a part of Santa Fe and the experience for our community. Again, we're not wedded to any particular street to be closed. We want to offer a regulatory efficiency to help our businesses, restaurants, and merchants to really create a pedestrian outdoor experience that would be beneficial to the Fort community. And if there are other street ideas that should be considered, we welcome that discussion. So my colleagues, Randy Randall from Tourism and John Romero from Parks, Public Works are available to answer questions. And so I open the discussion for you, and thank you for letting me review a preamble.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rich. Randy or John, did you have anything to add at this point, or should we move into questions from counselors?
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity, but why don't we just move into questions and deal with any specific issues?
Great, thank you. Councilor Rivera, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the way I read this new resolution, it's open to any business, is that correct? Not just restaurants?
Madam Chair, Councilor, that is correct.
All right, so if any business on any street can apply, I know there's certain criteria that they have to meet. The initial discussion was about San Francisco Street. We've been hearing a lot about Don Gasper. There are many restaurants around that surround the plaza. If they all applied and they all qualified, we could be closing down the whole area, potentially.
Madam Chair, Councilor, probably not. That's why Public Works is very involved with this to ensure, and John can speak to it as our street engineer, that to ensure that traffic continues. And I think the intent was to definitely not deal with any main arteries through this city in any way that would be overly disruptive. It was just to deal with generally smaller connector kind of streets that could be closed without creating major interference. It's definitely will be a situation where every restaurant or every business wouldn't get the opportunity. It's where it would be the most appropriate was the consideration that would be used for this resolution. And I might add that San Francisco was withdrawn because it wasn't intended to be the focus of this. It was actually a later add-on that the businesses brought forward, but it wasn't intended to be the focus, and we didn't want that to be the problem that would prevent it from happening where it would be most appropriate.
Before we go to John, there was supposedly a petition circulated with the businesses on San Francisco Street. Do you have a copy of that?
Madam Chair, Councilor, I have not been given that yet. It was done by two business owners, Joe DeBella and Joe Garcia, who are both on San Francisco. I've been given the names of over 40 businesses that did sign. There were individual sheets that they used. We don't have a particular format for these petitions, so I do not have that yet. They have not presented it to the city yet.
If we could get that, that would be great before this moves on to Public Works.
Madam Chair, Councilor, I have asked Mr. DeBella for the list, and of course I have a copy of the actual petition, but we need to have the actual signatures, and I've asked him for that. I haven't gotten it yet, but we will make every effort to have it distributed to all council members by end of day tomorrow.
Thank you. John, so how would you decide which streets are appropriate to close or not to close?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera. Along the lines of what Randy said, we won't be allowing it on any major streets. Those would be arterials or collectors, main arteries through the city. It is a case-by-case scenario, and it's a term that's always thrown around in the engineering community, and it's a tough one, but it has merit because it's hard to develop an exact matrix for everything. So a lot of it's going to be based on engineering judgment. But again, we won't be closing major arteries. We're going to be coordinating with the fire department on every closure to see if it doesn't affect their response time. So we'll definitely be taking into account the emergency response routes, although those do heavily correlate with our collectors and arterials. But those would be the main areas that we would look to keep open.
All right, so let's quickly talk about San Francisco Street, which was the initial one proposed. And then recently we've been getting a lot of email traffic about Don Gasper and Shelby, which, Don Gasper and San Francisco then would intersect. How would you make a decision on that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera. So again, looking at it strictly from an operational standpoint, a traffic operational standpoint, we would think that they could be closed. And the reason is there's not a whole lot of property on those, or there's not any property actually on those streets that are directly accessed, with the exception of the First National Bank, although they do have access off of Palace, and that's the access that they use. They have a secondary access on San Francisco Street that's not heavily used. The areas that do utilize that road to get to their establishments, such as La Fonda, maybe the Cathedral, we feel that there would be a reasonable route for them to utilize, such as Water Street. That brings up a street like Water Street. That would be a little more difficult to close. And again, this is where the engineering judgment comes into effect. But we have a parking lot based off there. We have a lot of access points that are off there. So if we were to close San Francisco, that would cause us to definitely leave Water Street open. So that way, all those businesses do have a reasonable alternative to get access.
So you're going to be making judgment calls on which businesses get to thrive during this time and which ones basically have to just stick to what they're doing.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, the answer is yes. And the unfortunate thing is that's in our job description on a day-to-day basis. We do issue right-of-way obstruction permits, even exclusive of all this discussion, and we have to make those decisions on a constant basis. People utilize those for construction, to stage construction, cranes, dumpsters, all that type of stuff. And so we do exercise consistency. So in any instance, if we do approve one location and don't approve another, we'll always have justification as why that is the case. And we'll be able to explain why one got it and someone else didn't.
So something like a whole hog on Guadalupe Street, which doesn't have a patio, I don't believe, they could petition and potentially get all the signatures they need, all the approvals they need, and then you would make a judgment call on that. But I imagine that's considered an arterial.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, yes, that is an arterial. So that would be one of the main reasons why we would most likely deny full closure of the street, especially for a long period of time.
Okay, full closure, you said, but you could allow partial closure?
Well, what I mean is partial use of the right-of-way. So we would definitely look at allowing a parklet or maybe utilization of the parkway and sidewalk area if it's feasible in that area. That is a potential, but closing the road itself to make a pedestrian area on Guadalupe may not be as feasible.
And really, the way this is written, these petitions can come, or these requests can come from anywhere in the city, right?
Yes, it can come from anywhere in the city. So we'll be open to these ideas throughout the entire city.
Does this include home business, do you know?
I have not considered that, and I'd have to, I guess it would, if they have a legitimate business establishment, you know, I'd probably have to consult with land use as well as the city attorney's office to make sure it's a legitimate use of their property. But if it is, we would definitely consider it.
All right, so if this ordinance were passed the way that it's written, you would be the final authority, right?
Yes, after coordinating with sometimes land use and with the fire department. And of course, the property owners.
All right, so if, again, the initial resolution said San Francisco Street. So if they applied and were approved, we wouldn't have an opportunity to have a discussion on it, public hearing. We wouldn't have any say on it after this is passed or not passed, right?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, that is correct.
Okay. So I'll allow my fellow councilors to weigh in as well. I don't want to take up too much of the time, but I do want to say for the record that if San Francisco were to close, Don Gasper were to close, I would want the city to look at opening up Palace all the way through to give people an opportunity to continue to drive close to a place that they find so sacred to them. I'd also want us to consider maybe making the Sandoval parking garage free during the same time so that locals could go park and walk if they decided to do that without charge. So there's no other way for me to get that on the record in case this passes. So I want at least that to be known, that I think there are options to getting people that still give them the ability to still drive by the plaza, or give them an opportunity to park for free and walk if they decided to do that. So that's all I have for now, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Rivera. Councilor Garcia, you had your hand up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick, this one's an off the wall question because it's in here. Talks about cruise nights. Do we have dates of cruise nights established?
Madam Chair, Councilor, I'm not aware of any specific dates. I think it just provided an opportunity that those could be established.
Okay, I just was not aware. Thank you for clarifying that, Randy. You know, with a proposal like this, I think there's great opportunity. You know, we've got to do it right, though. And that's the whole thing, is we want to focus on doing it right. And that means, in some instances, I understand the business community wants an immediate impact, but how do we do it strategically? How do we look at how we can do it in the sense where we can, if we do close down a road, it's going to have the best impact on the surrounding businesses. You know, as Councilor Rivera noted, we've got a lot of emails around Don Gaspar, and that was even prior to, I think, even this resolution fully coming out. So I was like, what? It wasn't even up. There was San Francisco Street. And now San Francisco Street is not the main focus, but it still could be. I think it was that, unfortunately, it's a tactic to say, well, the focus is not on San Francisco Street, it's on any street, but it's still possible. I like Councilor Rivera's idea of opening up Palace, but I know historically there's been, you know, incidences where, you know, either somebody's wrecked into the Palace of the Governors. So I would suggest we keep Palace closed and keep San Francisco Street open. So that leads to my question is San Francisco Street, John, then not determined a major artery? I mean, I think that street probably gets some of the most traffic downtown. Have we done a study to see what streets get the most traffic downtown?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I'd have to look at count maps. The Metropolitan Planning Organization manages average daily count maps throughout the city. But the way we designate roadways is not necessarily based on volume, but based off of purpose and need. So for instance, a primary arterial would be considered a road that connects cities, that goes through cities to connect other cities, like San Francisco, even through this road. Secondary arterials are the main routes to get you around the city, such as Zia and Rodeo. So an analogy I always use is, I forget what US highway is out there. I believe it's a US highway, but if you drive through Fort Sumner, there's probably a handful of cars that drive through there a day, but it's a primary arterial because it provides a connection across the state. So it's not, again, primarily, it's not based on volumes, it's based on function. So San Francisco Street, I consider to be a feeder street. I consider, and this is explained on our roadway classification map that the city in conjunction with the Metropolitan Planning Organization establishes. So in the downtown area, off the top of my head, the arterials that we have would be Guadalupe, Paseo de Peralta, Sandoval is one because it's used to get through around town, through town, not to a specific designation. So I hope that answers your question, but I would not consider it to be an arterial. Or
okay. Thank you, John, for that clarification. The second part of the question that wasn't answered was, do we know the most traveled streets downtown?
If you can give me 1 second, if you could, while you guys ask any other questions, I'll try to find that so I don't hold you guys up, and then I'll raise my hand once I find that data for you.
Okay, thank you. I would really appreciate that, John. Just because I would like for us to look at closing streets that would have the least impact on vehicle traffic. I think, given that San Francisco, and I would be shocked if it's not the most used, if not one of the most used streets downtown, we would want to ensure that we don't disrupt that. I think we need to ensure that we are working with our local businesses, but the local businesses also have to understand that it's a road that's highly used. I know the proposal is to drum up business, so to speak, but my question is, how is business now? I know that due to the governor's order, I think retail business is at 25% capacity, restaurant is at 50%. I'd like to, find out, are we seeing capacity issues? I know I've been out recently, not necessarily to sit down and eat, but when I go pick up food at a restaurant, to me, there's not folks waiting outside. When I go to a retail establishment, there's not a line for folks to get into the business. So either they're not policing their capacity, or there's not a capacity challenge. And so that, to me, I want to ensure that if we do shut down streets, we're dealing with a challenge, and we're doing it because we're addressing a challenge. I know the second part of the equation is to open up streets for potential outdoor dining opportunities. I know that several cities across the country have enacted this. I think it's a great opportunity for us to look into. But I want us to move forward in a strategic manner should we go that route, and in a sense where we're not causing disruption on closing streets, and we are making it most beneficial for those restaurants that participate in such an opportunity, because it will be an additional cost on that business to either have an individual be security for their retail business on the street, or you're going to need the supplies for restaurants to keep, for example, their food warm as they're taking it to their tables. You need that system in place. And do we have those systems in place now? Do they have those systems in place now to make that happen? Because like I said, at the end of the day, if we do move forward with this, I want it to be successful, but I want to ensure that we're not impeding and making more challenges for ourselves in the future. Should San Francisco Street be the highest traveled street in downtown, when we hear from John, I would like for there an exception to be made to not have that street be included in this resolution. I think, and we need to take that into consideration with any of the highly traveled streets downtown Santa Fe. Those should be granted exceptions to not, and I understand and sympathize with the business owners on those streets, but that we want to ensure that we're moving forward in a direction that's smart and will lead to success. Let's see. I think that's all I had at the moment, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Counselor, did you want any, as to the volume of business in town? I could speak to that a little bit if you'd like. In dealing in a, thank you, Counselor. In talking to probably more hotels specific, but also restaurants, outdoor dining is definitely far more popular than indoor dining right now. And I've seen through webinars quite a bit of statistics that show that people are reluctant to go back indoors, but they're very anxious to get out to dine at their restaurant in an outdoor environment. So part of this was to help restaurants create added floor plan, but also to have that added floor plan be in an outdoor environment. I do know that a few of the hotels are hitting their cap on weekends right now. A few were full. This La Fonda, Rosewood, Hotel Santa Fe, I know we're all filled to their 50% this past weekend. During the week, they're running between 10 and 20%, maybe 30 at La Fonda. But the and the retail has a flow. Restaurants, people go, they sit down and they take more time. The retail has a flow. So I don't think the 25% restriction is quite as harmful to them as frankly it is for the restaurants. As to their ability to serve the outside area, if the restaurant wants to extend alcohol service, it has to be contiguous to their restaurant. So a restaurant can't operate down the street. The actual space has to be contiguous. So the ability to serve hot food hot and cold food cold is not a problem for the restaurants because it has to be right there contiguous to their property. And let me remind you too that the proposed closure is temporary. All of this would go away by the 31st of October, unless council were to like the idea and want to continue it, extend it in any place. But this resolution would sunset on October 31st. And the ABC, to support this idea across the state, has come up with a temporary ability for a restaurant to expand its floor plan by 25% to accommodate the expansion of their floor plan for the additional alcohol service. In street areas, a restaurant might want to go beyond that 25%, and ABC has indicated a willingness to look at it on a case-by-case basis, again, recognizing the extreme economic concerns that the restaurants are in right now. So I hope that answers the questions. And as to excluding any particular street, I am fully supportive that council represents the people of our city. And if council in its greater wisdom feels that a particular street should be excluded, I think that should be written into this resolution so that it's not a problem. And we don't allow concern over approval of a particular street to interfere with where closures could exist and could be extremely beneficial to some businesses. The first business that actually came to me with the idea of a street closure was Pascal's with regard to Don Gaspar. And you say you've gotten a lot of feedback on Don Gaspar. I haven't gotten any. I'd love to know if it was pro or con. And they did get 100% of the businesses on Don Gaspar to sign off on the petition that they circulated. Their business at 50% will not make economic sense. And that 27-year business literally could go out of business without the ability. So I would hate to have concern over closing of one street interfere with where it would be appropriate that we could. And I would encourage this committee and the governing body and Public Works to specify any particular streets that with a consensus you do not feel should be closed.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. And you kind of brought up some additional questions from me, because you had brought up that it's mostly the restaurant business that's looking for the additional capacity, not necessarily retail. And so my question is, and I'm looking towards the future, 4 years from now, when our economy is back in order, and should we move forward with closing some streets and it's highly successful, how do we deal with potential, I guess, which, for lack of better words, leasing the street? Because they are basically expanding their business footprint onto city property. So then do we start to charge for space on the street, the curb, etc.? Because they're expanding outside of their brick and mortar building. How do you foresee that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, I'd be glad to give you my opinion on it. I think that this is being instituted and it's been brought forward by the restaurant, and it has been primarily brought forward by restaurants, that because they're restricted at 50%, and I'm on a subcommittee for the Economic Council that advises the governor, and all feedback we've been given is that the restrictions beyond 50% will probably not be lifted fully until there is a vaccine in place. So the concept of this is to get it through this season. If it was highly successful, and it was very successful, the restaurants, and they still wanted to do it after they could use 100% of their original floor plan, I think and if the council wanted to continue, I definitely think a charge should exist, because then they're getting added value as opposed to this being able to try to compensate for the 50% loss of floor plan that they're getting. But I totally agree. I think it would be a revenue source for the city. And it's unfortunate that we don't have a street like many cities have, where there really is a high concentration of restaurants. Our restaurants are more scattered, and probably the cost of rents on the plaza make it even more difficult. You have to move away from the plaza. But I think it could be a future revenue source if it was successful, and if council felt it was a good idea to continue.
Okay, I think that's something we should consider as we're moving through the committee process, to amending this, that this resolution is in alignment with the governor's 50% restaurant capacity order, and it only applies during that time frame, that it sunsets after. Because then, should it be successful, like I said, I think it's a great idea. I think it's an opportunity for us to expand on how not only our visitors, but our local people can experience Santa Fe. And I think should we move forward with this, we want it to be successful, but we want to ensure that we're not taking away from the community as well. And so you did spark, and so I definitely want to look into having that added into, This would sunset once the 50% capacity mandate from the governor expires. This then would expire, and we can bring forth the new resolution that would have stipulations such as, what it would cost in regards to rent, so to speak, should a business or a restaurant want to move forward with this type of opportunity.
Madam Chair, Councilor, the one thought on that might be that it would be when restaurants are able to get back to 100%, because I could see that there could be a situation where the governor would say restaurants could be at 60% or 70%. The whole idea would be when they're back at full capacity, then that this could sunset. That might be the way to state that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Randall. That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to point out that the resolution on page 3 does say in the whereas section, it says closing certain streets in Santa Fe until the end of October 2020 would allow more restaurants and businesses to take advantage of state and city opportunities to expand their footprint and would allow for greater access to those businesses by non-vehicular traffic. And then it says in the be it resolved, temporary street closures may only be implemented between July 1st and October 31st, unless extended by adoption of the resolution by the governing body. So it does have an end, although it doesn't say 2020 like it implies in the whereas clauses. So probably need to have an amendment that either, I think this was just looking at July to October of this year, not tying it to the governor's pulling back on the occupancy standards. So just to point that out as we move forward.
On that point, Madam Chair, on page 2, line 16, it could also be determined by the city manager.
Right, and again, the problem is that in these resolutions, it's, the rules should be set out in the be it resolved section, not in the whereas. The whereas is really, those whereas clauses are kind of setting the stage, setting the table, if you will, for what's going to be resolved, what we're going to do. So if there's substance rules that we want to see followed in the whereases, I think we need to bring them down into the be it further resolved side. Okay.
Madam Chair, quickly on that point, I think the whereas on page 2 is relating to the current street closures that we did by resolution 2014-49, I believe.
Yeah, that's one of them, the People to the Plaza resolution.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, John, you had your hand up. Did you find the information you were looking for, or do you want me to move on?
Yeah, Madam Chair. So I took counts from a recent study done for the Lenzik hotel development. And what we have on Sandoval, which we consider an arterial, we have about 7,000 cars a day. And on San Francisco Street, we had roughly 1,700 cars a day on San Francisco Street.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Cassett Sanchez, I believe you had your hand next in my order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So John, I have a question for you. So essentially, if a street wasn't an arterial or a secondary arterial, it could potentially be on the list for street closures unless we added to the resolution that it would not be one that's considered. In the downtown area, would we ever get to a point of a critical mass? So enough of the side streets decide that they want to close it, it would cause traffic flow impact within the downtown area?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, it's a good question, and that there is that potential, and that we would definitely be looking into that. The example of San Francisco and Water Street is an example where we would only be able to close one or the other. If we close San Francisco Street, I would think closing Water Street would then cause too much limitation to access to all those other people that would otherwise use San Francisco Street. Same thing, and then we'd also have also have Palace closed. So having all three of those closed together, to me, would be approaching some form of critical mass.
Okay, thank you. I think that you know, as this moves through and as we're considering it, it would be useful for me to see what the streets are in downtown Santa Fe that would be, because I'm guessing that this primarily would be impacting the downtown. I know it's very possible that there might be some other areas that would apply. But in terms of having enough streets where it looks like there would be some interest, I believe it'd be downtown Santa Fe. I'd be interested to see what streets would be, a list of what streets would be completely off the board that we consider too essential in terms of traffic flow in downtown. And then it also might be interesting, you know, like, is this a first come, first serve? So whichever the first street comes in, or is there some streets that we would find to be more beneficial than others that would have a greater general impact on business for the city? I don't know if Mr. Randall or Mr. Brown might have some information on, you know, if we're closing down a street that's impacting 1 or 2 businesses versus a street that's closing or that'd be impacting 15 businesses. I think we'd want the most bang for our buck, considering that we know there'd be some challenges with traffic at some point, that there will definitely be some adjustments. Does anybody on the team have any thoughts about that?
Madam Chair, Council, it's definitely important that any street closed has the full support of the businesses that are on the street, that it benefits more than just a business, particularly if it's a fairly long street. I know that there's some interest and it's been expressed to me interest of closing Marcy between Lincoln and Washington only after 5:30 each evening, where restaurants would then move furniture out onto the street. That would be after the business flow of the day. And there are 3 restaurants there, I believe, that could benefit from that. So I know that I've heard that they were interested in that. The owner of Il Piatto has expressed that to me. I haven't seen a petition on it yet. But there are a few situations like that, which would be just timely closures. Now, that puts a lot more burden, obviously, on the restaurants and or the businesses to set up and tear down and set up and tear down. But if they're willing to do something like that and it made sense, but to close Marcy all day long would make no sense at all. So so I know there's that kind of situation. There's also been expressed interest in the Rufina area about closing streets. They're very much missing the traffic that Meow Wolf brought in for the last couple of years. And they feel that if they were able to close a street out there, that it would be able to attract more people, not just visitors to the city, but residents as well, and make it kind of a residential hub for more outdoor dining and excitement. So I have heard interest expressed there.
That's interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing that. Although I'm sure they're missing the foot traffic and not the vehicle traffic, based on what I've heard from the Rufina area.
I guess you can get a place to park. You're exactly right.
Well, that's kind of brings me to my other question about where the final approval for this. So, John, would you make the final recommendation, and then is the final approval for a street closure, does that go to the city manager? Does that come to us? How does that process play out? Because again, there seems to be a point where there potentially might be a need for balance.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Sanchez. I would be the ultimate approval. And the reason for that, at least at this time, you know, I know we've mentioned whether time is of the essence or not. And, you know, we're already into our summer season. So as Rich Brown explained in his preamble, you know, we're wanting to try to make a nimble process during this time. And we understand that it comes with some uncertainty, but in order to completely vet every single closure through every single approving body, by the time we do that, it's going to be October 31st. I do think, you know, again, it's just this summer. We can learn a lot from it. If we do close streets and there's not that many people out on them, we can understand what the benefit is of it. we could maybe get some real life data regarding traffic to see how it impacts traffic. I think now during the summer, as we all know, the traffic in general is just, and you alluded to this earlier, traffic is just, there's not that much traffic. So I do think right now, if we do some closures, there is less potential, at least this summer, for there to be traffic issues, at least as it pertains to the closures that we approve.
Madam Chair and Councilor, I'd also like to add that the restaurants, particularly if we're talking about restaurants, they have to make an investment in chairs and tables that can withstand the outdoor climate in the event of rain and that get the sun on them during the day. And they're making that investment. It's important that we give them the maximum length of time that we can to amortize that cost for their business. I know a couple of restaurants that were considering the parklets, even when it was offered to them at no cost, because of the cost of the barriers that have to be put around those parking spaces, like you see out in front of the Rosewood Anasazi right now. It almost makes it cost prohibitive for them. So they have to have a maximum length of time to amortize the cost of the investments that they have to make for the outdoor expanded service.
Okay, that is absolutely a true consideration. So thank you. One of my other questions, and Randy, you may have some insight into this. One of the places, or one of the ways that this has really impacted our city is being a town that has so much tourism. A lot of individuals have lost jobs. One of the reasons that I find this proposal interesting, and that to Councilor Garcia's point, I think that we need to do it right, but I think that it's a really exciting and interesting idea, is I'm hoping that it might be able to bring back some jobs. And I'm curious, either Randy or Rich, if either of you have any insight from restaurants, from shops, if they have indicated that they could increase employment or increase hours for many of our residents that I know are struggling, because this is supposed to be their high season. This is supposed to be when they make a lot of their income for the year.
Madam Chair, Councilor, I'll add a little, say something, and then Rich can add in too. But I know for a fact that the restaurateurs that I've spoken with feel that the ability to have outdoor dining will be far more beneficial than right now indoor dining. As I mentioned before, there's a reluctance on the part of many individuals to go into the indoor spaces. A lot of statistics are out there that suggest one is safer in an outdoor environment than an indoor environment where there's no air conditioning circulating the air that people are breathing. And so I think there's no question that expanding their floor plan and allowing them to get back at least close to what they might have had before the pandemic, and having that expansion be in an outdoor environment will result in increased traffic to the restaurants and increased hiring. There's no question. They're all anxious to bring back employees. They just can't do it right now. They can't afford to do it.
Madam Chair and Councilor Sanchez, in the bigger picture, a lot of these small restaurants and businesses have applied for the PPP loan through the federal government, and they have to employ their employees in order to have the loan take effect. And so now that we're in sort of our tourism high season, they really want to get folks back to work, because the federal government just 2 days ago or 5 days ago changed the percentage of money you can get your loan to use for operations. And so they see it as a way to sort of take advantage of the time that the city is now opening and there's business to be had, and they want to keep people employed. So there's kind of a motivation for them to get back into action, so that these loans that they've actually applied for, that they don't get sort of stuck with money that they have to bring back. So if they're in business and they take the loan, they can be forgiven. But if they're not in business and they've already applied for this loan, they're stuck with trying to figure out how to pay it back.
And they also expanded the length of time they have to consume those payroll dollars. So that really ties in well to the to allowing the restaurants to be out there until the end of October. And it's really weather that came up with the October 31st date. It's also a date that ABC picked. So we felt it made the most sense to align the approval that they were getting from the state for alcohol service to line up with the approval they might get from the city for the dining service.
Yeah, that does make sense. So thank you so much. So I know West San Francisco Street, we'll see, but some concerns that were brought up that I really want to make sure that we're thinking about. Some people mentioned individuals who may be in wheelchairs, who can't walk, and if we were to close San Francisco, that it would limit access to the plaza. I know that we actually probably have some plans in place because we've closed streets before for fiestas, for Pride, for Spanish and Indian markets. How do we address some of the ADA concerns, making sure that people do still have access if they cannot park far away and walk up? And I know that Councilor Rivera did have the suggestion of the Sandoval lot, but I think that some people were really concerned about not being able to get very close if San Francisco Street were to be closed.
Madam Chair, Councilor Sanchez, as far as removing accessible spaces close to the plaza, if we had significant closures that eliminated a certain amount of parking spaces, we can definitely look at relocating them as we do during our major festivals. There is a potential though for a positive effect on ADA, and the way it happens is a lot of our sidewalks themselves. So if the intent is for the people just to go downtown to the plaza and only the plaza, then that's where, getting them parked as close to the plaza is ideal. But if they're wanting to shop in all the plaza restaurants that are right outside of the plaza, a lot of our sidewalks are old and are very difficult for them to maneuver. So if we have streets closed, they can use those as areas to move around in the plaza area, if you consider the plaza area to extend beyond just the grass.
Thank you. That's a good point. I forgot about those sidewalks downtown. And then Councilor Rivera, maybe you are the individual to help me understand this, as it's a bit of historical knowledge. But I know that there was Councilor Garcia brought this up, the discussion of cruise nights, and that this was something that was implemented in the People to the Plaza, is what I read there. Councilor Villarreal is shaking her head no, so those did not happen.
I think they happened in conjunction with events that the police department was putting on. So they would hold a community event and have cruise nights, and I think that's what it's referring to.
If I might provide, I was curious, I printed the copy of that particular resolution. Let me just read it for our edification. It says, be it further resolved that the governing body directs the city manager to designate a staff team to, 1, analyze the effects of the street closures, which shall include at a minimum the economic impact of the street closures and modifications to fee structures to make downtown parking more practical for the greatest number of residents and visitors, and increase the use of underutilized parking facilities. And then also the number of public safety incidents that occur in relationship to the increased public safety presence in the plaza. Then 2, coordinate the purchase of tables, chairs, and umbrellas for public use and placement on Lincoln Avenue and or Old Santa Fe Trail or other locations as needed. And then 3, which is relevant to this, what we were talking about, designate cruise nights, which will permit all 4 streets surrounding the plaza to be, hold on, I just lost the right page, to be open during the designated cruise nights. So it sounds like under this resolution, we could still designate cruise nights. And this suggests that the entire plaza could be open for those. But I'm sure we could also designate, part of the plaza to be opened on those nights. So it sounds like something we still have the ability to do under this resolution, which was People to the Plaza in 2014.
Thank you, Councilor Romero Worth. Were those analyses done? Because I think that would be something that would be very useful for us to have as this moves through and we're looking at making those decisions. So whoever might be able to pull those up for us and send them our way, I'd be really interested to see those. I know that we would be looking at some different factors, but I still think it'd be interesting to see them. Sorry, just checking my notes to make sure that I got everything or somebody else got everything. All right, I think that all those questions have been answered. I will say that the majority of emails that I've received about Don Gaspar and Shelby have been in favor of closing those streets. But, you know, to Councilor Villarreal's earlier point, I agree that while we maybe did not violate the Open Meetings Act, I wish that there had been more time for people to see what was being considered. I think that is important because as businesses have been reaching out to me, I have been asking them some of my specific questions. So some of the shopkeepers, I've asked them, how would you be utilizing this? Because I'm really curious to hear. Shops, restaurants make sense to me, but I'd be really curious to hear what shopkeepers are thinking and how they might be able to utilize this, as well as I've been asking people the employee question. So Randy and Rich, as you're speaking with shopkeepers in conjunction with this, I would really be interested in hearing how many feel that they'd be able to take advantage of this and how it would be impactful. I think overall, there's a lot of things that we need to look at. I would like to find a way to make this work. It absolutely is better for us to be outside. Again, I'm really concerned about our workers who work in the restaurant industry who are really impacted by this. And also they are the ones that are the most at risk when they're indoors at restaurants. And so having an opportunity for them to move outside as well and to have that outside environment, both for their economic health and their physical health, I would be in favor of, but I do think that we need to make sure that this is done well in regards to the traffic flow, to other uses of the street that are really important, to, you know, making sure we don't hit that critical mass and seeing if there are some really interesting configurations where, you know, maybe Marcy's closing, starting at 5:30 and another street is opening, so that we could get confusing, but I think that we're going to need to get creative as we are looking at this. So yeah, thank you so much. I will yield the camera for now.
Great, thank you. Councilor Villarreal, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to my colleagues for asking questions that I had regarding this process. Again, my concern was about the process and procedures of how we communicate what we're trying to do. And it's been very confusing for the public about what street is being considered, what the actual resolution said, since we didn't see it. So that was my concern. I want to make clear that it wasn't about not considering any streets for possible closures or temporary closures. I think what was interesting is this whole conversation I've had even with restaurants like 2 months ago, where we were looking at and considering closing sidewalks and parklets. And I was very much in favor of that and wanting to work with our business owners about what that could look like with staff. I think what's happened is the communication dropped off completely with me, letting me know about what was going to be happening and moving forward. And it puts me in a very compromising position to not be able to communicate, hey, what's happening? What's being considered? So now we consider streets, and that was never part of the conversation before. And I'm open to that dialogue. I think when we've been throwing out certain streets, they make sense to me, the small ones, particularly Don Gaspar and Shelby, because they're very narrow and there are businesses that are located on that street. I think what I was trying to understand and put in, you know, the reason why I found out about even San Francisco wasn't even through this resolution, it was through the paper through a petition that Councillor Lindell and I didn't even see. So I think it would be important for business owners to let the councilors that represent this district where you stand on this, because I've only heard from one business owner off of San Francisco Street that was in favor of it, and I have yet to see the petition. So it's helpful to know where people stand with this, with business owners, and understand what they're considering and how much support they're getting on particular streets, because it doesn't, if I don't hear from people, then I just assume that there's only one person that's supportive of it. With Don Gaspar, we got the petition from business owners this morning, and so that was helpful. And I wrote the folks saying that this makes sense, but we just have to procedurally do things correct, so that people understand how we're moving forward. There's some things that I just want to make sure, I mean, I think I'm trusting John and staff will like think about the flow as we look at streets and how connectivity will still happen. What I'm wanting to understand better, and I agree with my colleague about how we can continue having the plaza accessible at least on one side. And I'd like for language to be included in that, that we would have at least one street on the plaza that would be open to vehicular traffic, only because of the mobility issues I see with our community. It's not about somebody wanting to stroll the plaza. If they can't stroll the plaza and they want to be able to drive by, I think that's important. So I'd like to understand better about this designated cruise nights, because that resolution, it didn't seem like we actually acted upon it, designating cruise nights anyway. We've actually eliminated a lot of cruising streets. One of them back in the days was Alameda. That was our favorite cruising street, because it could flow and you could see people crossing you and actually communicate with cars that are passing you on the other side. This wouldn't necessarily allow it, having one side of our plaza open. So what is the, who designates cruising nights and when would they be established?
Madam Chair, Councilor, that's a good question. I've been with the city since that resolution was established, and I've never heard of the committee that it suggests being set up. So I don't think there is a program to do it right now, unless Rich or John have other information. But I've never heard about that committee executing any of the, being set up to execute any of the items that the chair read during the, as she reviewed the resolution.
So on that point, Councilor Villarreal, I mean, we could change the resolution. So right now it says that now therefore be it resolved that the city shall apply the following framework when evaluating the temporary closure of streets to vehicular traffic. And number 6 is in accordance with the provisions of resolution number 2014-49, all streets surrounding the plaza shall be open to vehicular traffic during designated cruise nights. And then, of course, you'd have to refer back. This is the problem. This is like the Water Conservation Committee, right? So then you have to refer back to this resolution to figure out how you designate cruise nights. Maybe, I mean, if this is something that's really important to us, rather than refer back to that resolution, just in the resolution specify that designated cruise nights should be created by whoever, the city manager or a team or however we want to designate that, and that on those nights, all 4 streets are open for that activity. If that's, again, what's important to the community and to the governing body.
Yeah, I think we need language that establishes when those cruise times are. And I say times because people don't necessarily want to cruise just at night. So I'm wondering about that. Like, when are the cruise times? How will they be established? And then that would also be based on which streets are temporarily closed. So Does anyone have any suggestions? Because again, these are like changes that I want to be able to make, and I don't feel like right now, time-wise, we're trying to like wordsmith things to add to this resolution. So I guess, let me be clear. I want to look at ways to have language that would say at least one street should be open at the plaza. Not sure where to place that. How we would be more specific about establishing cruise days or times. Also, that we need language that would be clear about the temporary basis of this resolution, and that it would also be contingent on the states, the governor's orders on standards on occupancy, I guess. I don't know how else to phrase that. I did want to hear more about the relocation of handicap parking. Are we going to be doing that across the board when we look at these street closures?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, it really depends on the closure itself, what stalls exist there, and what we feel they're being used for. So it'll be on a case-by-case basis, but yes, we will take that into consideration if we are eliminating a stall, to see if we can relocate it somewhere within close proximity, or if it needs to be.
And that would be on a case-by-case basis then, John?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes. There may be some streets that don't have any accessible parking. And so, we just have to take that into consideration.
Okay. So I want to make sure that our business owners understand, we know this is a difficult time, and we're trying to be able to accommodate something that we've never had to deal with before in the past, about ways to safely open. And I agree with my colleague, workers are the most important piece to this, because they're what makes businesses go round. And if we're not keeping them safe, then we really don't have, we are risking just our economic opportunities to be able to thrive. So I think that's a big piece of this. And it doesn't say anything about workers being protected. I think it probably should say something of that effect, not just businesses opening, but that we want to make sure that workers are protected. And that's why we want to expand out into streets for temporary closure. The other thing is, I know that it's going to be the modifications for the businesses to be able to utilize streets is going to be cost prohibitive in some cases. So we want to be able to try to figure out what makes sense. I just want us to be transparent about what we're considering. And if there's folks on San Francisco Street or any other street for that matter, to really communicate that with, well, particularly the counselors that represent it, that the district would be helpful, but all of us, in some way. So yeah, I guess those changes in terms of languages, I'd like to be able to add in some way with an amendment. And I feel like right now, it's a little bit challenging to try to do that at this moment.
Counselor, can I, would you mind yielding the floor and maybe I can build off of what you're talking about? John, if you could, so you're the buck stops with you guy. Is that in your capacity as Public Works Director, interim Public Works Director, or in your capacity as a traffic engineer for the city? Which hat are you wearing when you are the decision maker, the final decision maker on street closures?
I think so, Madam Chair, currently right-of-way obstruction permits are issued through the engineering division. I believe the ordinance that allows us to regulate the closure of streets designates it to the Public Works Director or designee. So my division is currently that designee. And we currently do have that by ordinance have been delegated that authority to approve street closures. If we approve street closures through two different mechanisms. One is a right-of-way obstruction permit, and they're very similar. We almost could consolidate them into one, but the right-of-way obstruction permit, which this falls underneath and managed by my office. The other one are street cut permits. So anytime anyone, including utility companies or construction projects, cut into the streets, our streets and drainage division manages those permits.
So, but this wouldn't be what'd you call it again?
A street cut,
A
but
street cut. So that's not what we're talking about here. This would be a right-of-way permit, right?
yes,
Okay. And so just to be clear, so this resolution, the way it's currently written, it says, now therefore be it resolved that the city shall apply the following framework when evaluating the temporary closure of streets to vehicular traffic. So it lists 6 things that have to be evaluated. 1, temporary street closures will be established through the issuance of obstruction of streets permit issued by the City of Santa Fe Public Works Department. That's the right-of-way thing you were just talking about?
Madam Chair, yes.
Okay, but it doesn't say right-of-way. It calls it the issuance of an obstruction of streets permit, but we're talking about the same thing.
That's the formal term by ordinance of what the permit is called.
Okay, so the other thing that has to be evaluated is temporary street closures may only be implemented between July 1st and October 31st unless extended by adoption of resolution by the governing body. Now, we've already suggested that this is temporary, it's for this year. So I think we're gonna need to add 2020 in here to be clear that we're only talking about this year. So that's one change we know that has to be made. Then another thing that has to be evaluated, at least 75% of the businesses and residents whose primary access is on the proposed street must support the proposed street closure. So who's the burden on there? Is it the restaurant that wants to close the street, who's got to go around and find 75% of its surrounding neighbors in agreement? Or is that something the city's going to do? Where's the burden on that piece of this evaluation?
Madam Chair, that at least so far, the burden's been placed on the businesses who are in favor of the closure.
Okay, so we might want to say that. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And then number 4, the fourth thing that has to be evaluated is the terms of the closure shall ensure adequate emergency access verified by the city's police and fire departments. And John, you already suggested that you'll be the point person who will work with our police and fire to make sure that if we're going to close this, it's not going to affect response times in the area, that they'll still be able to move around. That's correct, yes?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, and then number 5, the terms of the closure shall accommodate accessible parking, ADA compliance, and adequate access for deliveries before 10 a.m. each day. And again, that would fall on you, John, correct? To make sure that we're accommodating as has been spoken about earlier, folks needing, accessible parking and then businesses needing deliveries. You would be coordinating that.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. And then finally, 6, the other thing that has to be evaluated in this is in accordance with the provisions of the resolution number 2014-49, which we've just been talking about, all streets surrounding the plaza shall be open to vehicular traffic during designated cruise nights. And we've already suggested that maybe we need to change that language to be clear, to make it so that we actually do designate cruise nights where all 4 would be open. But I guess my question is, now understanding this framework, you suggested, John, earlier that if it were what were your words? A major artery, that it couldn't be closed. So if we're just talking about the plaza, does San Francisco Street, is San Francisco Street a major artery? or how do you define major artery?
Madam Chair, so I would define that as either an arterial or major collector, and those are defined by the Santa Fe MPO in their roadway classification map, their currently adopted roadway classification map.
So, and is San Francisco Street so classified?
No.
Okay, so I guess the other thing that maybe this framework needs to talk about is that we wouldn't close a street that was a major artery, and major arteries are defined by the MPO or however we look at that. Because again, I would hate for a business to, realizing the burden is on them to figure out that their neighbors agree that the street should be, so they should be closed. They do all this work and then they get to your door, John, and you're like, oh, no, you're a major artery, you can't close, right? So I think we want to be clear in the resolution that, you know, if it's a major artery, it's an automatic no-go, and this is where you go to find that list. And so that's something else I think we ought to add in here. And then I guess the other issue is whether we want to say that beyond the designated cruise nights, I think going back to Councilor Rivera's point, that, you know, we want at all times, and I don't know if we do, but I'll just throw this out. We want at all times for at least one street, it's for some access to drive through the plaza. We don't ever want it completely shut off, or maybe we do. But if we don't, I think we should say that in the resolution. And so, for instance, if you were going to close San Francisco Street because that's where there are a high concentration of restaurants, you would want to make sure that you could still have a portion of the plaza opened, say the West Palace part in front of the Palace of the Governors, for people to cruise or take grandma through or whatever it is. And so I think, you know, maybe we want language in it that is very clear that some access to the plaza should be required at all times, if that's what we want to do. So I would just, I think those were the things I wanted to add and to clarify and to make sure people understood. And Councilor Rivera has been very patiently waiting again with his hand up, so I'd like to go to him if that's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was Councilor Villarreal finished with her line of questioning?
Sorry, I did sort of jump in on that. Yes, Councilor Villarreal, did you have other things you wanted to add?
No, I mean, what you reiterated is what I just said, and we need to add those as amendments in the next version that we'll be seeing soon. So I do yield the floor. Thank you, Councilor Rivera.
Sure. Just a couple follow-up questions. John, now the right-of-way or the obstruction permit, does it stipulate in the ordinance the reasons that it can be issued?
It does, and if you give me 1 second, I can pull it up. And then again, if you wanted to move on to another question while I do so, please do so.
All right, so I agree with the chair that I think the July through October date needs to have 2020 on it. Randy, if you could ask the restaurants between now and when this moves on, what would restaurants do in the instance if the weather changes and they have reservations outside? Would they cancel those reservations or would they move people inside? And I don't know if you have a sense of what they might do, but might be important to find out.
Yeah, I have Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I have a sense of it. I mean, I've been to Vail many times, and there's a lot of outdoor dining in that community on closed, and there's a lot of closed streets actually for pedestrian traffic. and it just backs up. It backs up into the restaurant. What restaurants do find, if people have reserved outdoor tables and it rains, we have bad weather, the no-show rate goes way up. So they do get a bunch of cancellations, but it also backs up, and they use the weather as their excuse. I know Lino at Osteria has about 6 outdoor, maybe 8 outdoor tables in his little courtyard. He then forces people upstairs where they don't want to go. But each restaurant kind of has their own backup weather plan. The beauty is our weather makes it less of a problem than it would be if we were in a really rainy climate. But in Florida, they get rain pops through, they shut down, and then they open up again once it stops raining. So each one would have to work. But I will definitely discuss that before Monday and get some input from specific restaurants.
Thank you. And then was there any discussion about the actual time frame? So it says won't start till 10 a.m. So you have that time for deliveries. What's the end time? Is it 10 o'clock? Is it midnight? Is it 2 a.m.? Have we had any discussion with restaurants or businesses about that?
Madam Chair, Councilor, good question. No, not really. The idea was it would be closed, I guess, through the evening, and then the next morning is when the deliveries would come in. So, and the deliveries would all be done through the fire access roads that are allowed. So there'd have to be a movable portion of the gate, which is why it has to be verified that that gate is put back in as well. But it would be during it was thought it would just be from early morning daylight, if you will, until about 10 in the morning.
So if you or Rich could have some discussion with the restaurants about that, what's a good time to end so that we're not keeping barriers up or we're not keeping roads closed until 2 a.m. if they only want till 9 o'clock at night. And then probably suggest that into the resolution somewhere. So
Councilor John has his hand up. I think he has an answer to your question if you're ready.
Oh, sure.
Hey, Councilor, so yes, so the ordinance, it's under chapter 23 of city code, grants us quite a bit of latitude, and it's pretty general. It basically says, except as otherwise provided, any person desiring to place any obstruction on any public street, alley, or way in the city shall make application to the Public Works Department for a permit to do so. Such permit shall be granted compliance with the terms as may be imposed by a city engineer and on the payment of a fee of $100. So it authorizes us for any reason to close the street.
All right. And does the permit itself have, is it good for a certain amount of time or is it undefined?
So the ordinance doesn't dictate a time, but we do. Most of the time for construction, we work with them and we establish a reasonable construction time. For this, the expiration would be October 31st if this resolution was approved.
The resolution would do it. Okay. Lastly, if there could be some communication, I guess, with and the restaurants that come to mind, Pascual's and Tia Sophia's, who only are open in the morning. So if we wouldn't block streets until 10 a.m. to allow for deliveries, and they close at, for breakfast at 1, in the case of Tia Sophia's, does that really give them much time to really benefit from this change? Would it even be beneficial for them to move things out at 10 and then bring everything back, 2.5 hours later? So if we could have that discussion with probably Tia Sophia's, I'm not sure how long Pascual's is open, but that may be an appropriate conversation as well.
Madam Chair, Councilor, I did hear from Tia's, they felt that being able to expand their capacity from 10 until they're closing at 2 would be beneficial to them. The intent was that they wouldn't have to move furniture in and out if the street was closed, that the access lane would, and it's a second issue with San Francisco Street. You've got restaurants on both sides, and how the fire lane is done. We were going to try to work with the fire chief to see what would be acceptable, and allowing the fire access could preclude a restaurant from being able to use it. Now, if Atia's didn't need to serve alcohol, then they could go across the fire lane and they could serve on the other side of the street. If alcohol service, it has to be contiguous. And we made a request to ABC that they allow a fire lane to interrupt the contiguous requirement, and they rejected that. They did approve the 5-foot walkway that's required for sidewalks to interrupt the contiguous, but they just felt the fire lane was too much to stretch the law.
All right, thanks. That was my other question about businesses on both sides and how the delivery or the fire lane would work. And I don't know if going straight down the middle would be an option, but something to look at. So we've given a lot of change, and sorry, go back to my original proposal about keeping at least Palace open. I do remember, and I thank Councilor Garcia for reminding me that there were some pedestrian incidents there at Old Santa Fe Trail and Palace. And I think it would be okay to keep that side of the plaza closed as well, as long as Palace were available for people to drive by. That is a tricky intersection with Washington, Old Santa Fe Trail, and Palace. We've had some incidents there in the past, so I would be amenable to that. And thank you, Councilor Garcia, and I think Councilor Romero Worth also brought it up as well. So that's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to interject here. It's 7 o'clock. We still have one presentation. I apologize to those folks who are on the meeting here. I am going to go one more time to Councilor Cassett Sanchez, but I would just ask the committee that we've had a great discussion. I think we've gotten a lot of clarity about what this does and what's still needed in order to get it where it needs to be. And we probably need to leave it for tonight and get to our last agenda item. But I do want to go one more time to Councilor Cassett Sanchez because she's been patiently waiting. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be very quick. I just wanted to make sure that we have a discussion about where the boundaries of business owners' property is essentially when we extend them outside, because we will have to make, if they're both kind of on the lines of their exact buildings, we do have some social distancing issues that we need to look at. So as we're creating those parameters, to be thinking about the space that they'll be able to occupy. So we can have that discussion further so we can keep moving along in our agenda, but I did want to put that out. So thank you.
Great. If I could, Jesse, I see you're on the Zoom call. Are you available?
And Madam Chair.
Great. So I assume you've been listening, and I'm just wondering, what's the next stop for this resolution?
It's Public Works and Utilities next Monday,
And then from there, it goes to the governing body on Wednesday?
the 24th. That's correct.
Okay. So back to Councilor Villarreal's point, it's moving right along. So I guess what I'd like to do is, clearly, I don't think any of us is happy with where this is as written. So wonder what our options are. Can we move it forward in concept, recognizing that we'd like to see some changes that reflect what's been listed here by everyone? Is the committee comfortable with doing that, or do you want to move it forward with no action? What's the pleasure of the committee? Councilor Cassett Sanchez.
I'm happy to move it forward, knowing that it's coming back to council and with the understanding that we will want to be seeing changes and seeing amendments. And I feel comfortable with that, as this is not the final vote, and there will be opportunities for some of you to see it at Public Works, and then we will all see it again at council. And yeah, so I feel comfortable moving it forward. I feel comfortable approving it in concept, essentially with the caveat that there are those changes that we would like to see in the final version.
Okay, do you want to make that a motion? Counselor Garcia, you raised your hand.
I just want to ensure that we have in Councilor Cassett Sanchez's motion, and it's up to her, that we include our recommendations for the amendments. Because I think it's critical we list out what we want to see changed in the resolution. It's to me, I'm fine with moving it along, but there are critical components that we are recommending that are moving it along.
Yeah, so Jesse, if you could come back on just a minute. So you heard the concerns of the committee tonight. Do you want us to go through and enumerate each of the things we did, or do you have a general sense of what it is this committee would like to see?
I would ask that he enumerate what the recommendations we made. That way, if there's any missed, we can publicly state it.
Okay, well, rather than put Jesse on the spot, maybe what we'll do is in the motion, we'll enumerate them.
I do have written down what I think is the correct ones, but.
Okay, so let's see. Councilor Cassett Sanchez, do you want to try a motion?
Yes, well, I would like to hear what Jesse has written down, because I have not written down everybody's. So I make a motion to approve item, I believe we're D, with the amendments that Jesse now reads.
The ones that I have are to ensure that at least one street along the plaza remain open. Be specific about certain cruise dates or times and who actually designates those. And I don't know if we want to do the city manager, if Councilor Villarreal, you have a preference on that, or if we should probably make that clear. That we're not going to close a major artery or collector, and then to insert the date 2020 after October 31st.
And add the something in the now in the whereas clause about workers, the importance of workers was on my list.
Sure. Cruise nights need to be clarified.
Yeah, I think he did mention that.
And Jesse, also an end time, so it starts at 10. What is an appropriate end time?
And Jesse, I also wanted us that there be specifications laid out for businesses regarding basically what their plot on the street would look like.
Okay, so anything else to add to that list of changes to this? If not, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councilor Cassett Sanchez, a second by Councilor Garcia to move this forward with a number of changes that we have given to Jesse. Could we have a roll call then?
Councilor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councilor Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
I'm going to abstain until I see the modifications and we do a better job with the notification aspects of this proposal.
and Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion pass.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everybody for the conversation. I think it was very helpful in lots of ways. With that, I am going to move to our next and final agenda item, which is an informational piece to Marcela Diaz. Marcela, very sorry to have kept you all waiting for so long, but very interested in hearing from you and the folks that you represent who've joined us about the impacts that this pandemic has had on the immigrant community in the broader Santa Fe community. So with that, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to remind folks that some of the presenters will be presenting in Spanish. And so if you want to hear the English speakers speak and the Spanish speakers interpreted, then you should all go to your interpretation globo or your globe on the right-hand side and put it into English so that you can hear the whole thing. Of course, if you're bilingual, you won't have to do that and you can hear us all speaking for ourselves. Thank you, Madam Chair and all counselors. We have a brief PowerPoint, and of course you can ask questions at the end, but we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about how the pandemic and the many different aspects of the pandemic has been impacting and how we think it will continue to impact our community in the future. So I'm going to share a screen and I'm going to ask that all of our panelists from Somos Un Pueblo Unido unmute themselves, por favor. Hay que prender sus micrófonos ahorita, sabiendo que durante toda la presentación nos van a poder oír. Y así no batallamos al empezar a hacer la presentación. So I'm about to share my screen and I hope this works. Can you all see it? Great. And so Maria Reina Tercero is going to begin, and I and Maria Lara and Zulema and Jacqueline and Raya Sindreta will chime in. ¿Tú quieres empezar, María?
Sí. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es María Reina Tercero. Soy miembro de Somos Un Pueblo Unido, una organización estatal que representa los intereses de la clase trabajadora y la comunidad inmigrante en Nuevo México desde hace 25 años. Somos tiene un centro de trabajadores que se inició en el año 2008 con el propósito de promover protecciones para los trabajadores en Santa Fe. Desde entonces hemos venido impulsando varias campañas como la del robo de salario, Ciudad Santuario, Ciudadanía y Censo. Siempre estamos buscando más protecciones para los trabajadores y todavía hay mucho que hacer. En la era del coronavirus, nuestro centro laboral continúa organizando a los trabajadores y buscando las protecciones necesarias para las familias trabajadoras y la comunidad en general. Gracias por la oportunidad que nos han dado de dar esta presentación. A continuación, les dejo a mi compañera María Lara.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria and I work at the Workers Center of Somos Un Pueblo Unido. I will give some information about the immigrant population in Santa Fe. Immigrants are driving growth in many rural and semi-rural communities in New Mexico's counties, and Santa Fe is no exception. Immigrants in Santa Fe play a key role in various industries, including hospitality, restaurants, construction, home healthcare, childcare, landscaping, housekeeping, retail, and more. We pay taxes just like everyone else, and we continue to grow deep roots in Santa Fe and throughout the state. It is estimated that immigrants make up 15% of Santa Fe and 13% of Santa Fe County, with a 2020 population of 85,502, according to the World Population Review. 2/3 of Santa Fe's residents live in a mixed status household. Additionally, median age for Santa Fe residents is 41 years, and the vast majority of immigrants are under the age of 50. Therefore, we are Santa Fe's younger population. Immigrants in Santa Fe are increasingly starting small businesses and are mainly student communities. Additionally, the majority of the immigrants between the age of 18 and 44 years old have resided in Santa Fe for more than 10 years and are I-10 tax filers. Now I will pass it to Marcela, who will continue the presentation.
Thank you, Maria. So what we want to talk more specifically about today is just the impact of COVID on immigrant families, mixed status families, as Maria has mentioned in our community. The impact obviously on our health and the health of and well-being, and particularly the mental health issues that are sort of coming up within our communities, particularly for children who've been sort of locked in their homes for a while. It's something that's come up. We just recently did a survey that we will be releasing very soon with Latinos Decisions. We surveyed 480 immigrant families with children in their households about their economic conditions, as well as their ability for their kids to learn through online practices. And so we're going to be presenting that information publicly, but also to superintendents throughout the state, including ours and the public education department. So please look out for that. Obviously, this has had an economic impact that folks will talk about, particularly the lack of federal relief for families that have seen dramatic decreases in their incomes as a result of COVID-19. There is also an impact on essential workers that have been working during this time period. Zulema will speak a little bit about a survey that we've done for essential workers in Santa Fe through our membership and through Facebook. Health and safety is a real concern there. And obviously it has impacted our ability to get an accurate census count. So Somos Un Pueblo Unido had a very robust door knocking campaign. We knocked on 13,000 doors before March 15th. And so Santa Fe City and County are lucky that we got out there very early with information about the census, but a lot of that outreach on the doors stopped, and we focused on phone banking and other ways of reaching the community about the census. And so it's a problem. COVID has posed obviously a problem. And for folks who live in Santa Fe County in rural areas with post office boxes, as you all know, it's not really been until last week or this week that they've even received their census, so their census questionnaires. And then obviously the impact on families and children through the reduction of income and sort of just the lockdown in the houses. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Zulema, I think, who's going to, yes?
Jacqueline.
Jacqueline, I'm sorry. I should have written that down on my notes. Jacqueline, who's going to talk about the economic impact of the pandemic on our families.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline, and I am a member of the Worker Centers of Somos Un Pueblo Unido. It is important for us as workers that you are elected officials know how this pandemic has affected us, especially to those workers that don't have an immigration status, because even though we contribute to the economy in many ways, we can access to many benefits available for the rest of the community. Most of us are mixed status families. Even if there is a citizen spouse in the families, we don't qualify for the federal stimulus check. Our contributions must be recognized, and the important role we play in the recovery of the economy. Undocumented workers don't qualify for unemployment. Neither they qualify for the federal stimulus check. They available resource for us in our community. Are scarce, and they were never enough. Having food on the table is great for us. We also have to pay bills, rent, school, tuition for the children, etc. Our Workers Center receives hundreds of calls for the immigrant community asking for resources, food, cash, assistance to pay bills. Most of us, our families, have already spent their savings and are asking for loans. Now that we are reopening the economy, many of us are going to have to pay the debts. In my personal experience, I lost my job since March 19. And since then, I haven't been able to get back to work. I was working for 2 restaurants doing catering. I don't have any other income. I have 2 children that live with me. My children are students. We didn't have internet and couldn't afford it. The internet service was crucial for my kids and students. So my daughter finally get the internet from school. We still have many needs, and I haven't been able to go back to work. I don't know when we'll go back. My employers haven't called me. I don't know qualify for unemployment on this stimulus check. I am anxious because even if I go back to work, it's going to be difficult to get back on track. Also, I am afraid of getting sick and not being able to support my family. Thank you, and I pass the word to Marcela.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We really appreciate that information. I do want to let folks know on the call and in the meeting that we have really been, for those hundreds of people that have been contacting Somos, we have been sending them to the city and the county Santa Fe Connect program because it's such a great program, and we're a statewide organization, and in other places there is no such connector that way. There aren't those kinds of resources in places like Roswell and Hobbs, New Mexico. So it's really great, but you all probably know that the funding for rental assistance and other financial assistance through the Santa Fe Connect and through the organizations that are part of it are drying up. And this is when we need to figure out how to bolster those reserves because, even though we're getting back to work, we're still in debt. And we're still having to face 2, 3, 4 months worth of bills and rent that we still owe. And so that is a problem. And we're already starting to see people being turned away and some of those resources drying up. So we just want to talk briefly, and we've talked to many of the counselors about this report that we worked on along with other organizations and the New Mexico Voices for Children called Essential But Excluded, that really tries to quantify money-wise, what the impact of the lack of economic federal relief is having, not just on families like Jacqueline's, but also on cities and counties that have high percentages of immigrants in their communities like Santa Fe. We are one of 5, the city of Santa Fe and Santa Fe County are one of 5 communities in the state that have a much higher than state average of immigrants. And so some of the highlights of this report, are that as immigrant mixed status families, we put in close to $400 million per year in state and local taxes. And yet these stimulus efforts at the national level bypassed our communities. About 60,000 undocumented immigrants in the state pay more than $67.7 million in state and local taxes. And that's not just gross receipts taxes, that's income taxes. Many of us, as you know, who don't have social security numbers use an individual tax identification number that's given to us by the IRS to pay our state and federal taxes. Due to mixed status family exclusion from the CARES Act, 30,000 New Mexico adults and 38,000 of their children were denied more than $55 million in stimulus rebates. That money did not come into our family budgets as mixed status families, and they did not come into our cities and our counties. And so again, Santa Fe has a high percentage of immigrants. Santa Fe really missed out, and we're going to see the impact of that as we try to recover and reopen our economy. In addition, about 16,000 low-wage workers whose employers pay into the unemployment insurance system they did not qualify and do not qualify for unemployment benefits, which means that more than $2 million per week in unemployment insurance benefits are not reaching our state, our cities, and our counties. And so that has a really big impact on our city as well. The great thing is that New Mexico Voices for Children has also put together some numbers per city and per county. In Santa Fe, stimulus dollars that did not come into our households really have an impact. And so in the city of Santa Fe, more than $2 million bypassed adult I-10 filers just in our city. About 2 million bypassed our US citizen children. So this is us not getting the $1,200 stimulus per adult in household and not getting the $500 stimulus per child in our household. That's just the city of Santa Fe. That means about $3.5 million is not recirculating in our economy as we are going into debt. At the county level, obviously, the numbers are higher. You can see, although I misspelled children there, that the total is over $5 million that did not come into Santa Fe County. And that really has a big impact as we try to recover as a city. And it also has an impact on these families who, in addition to not spending that money in our economy, paying their bills, buying goods, going to the restaurants that are reopening now, doing those sorts of things, it also means that we are going to have a higher reliance on private as well as public social benefits in our community. So this really is a problem for a city and county like Santa Fe. That I wanted to now pass it over to Zulema, who's going to talk about the issues that we've been facing as essential workers.
Good evening. My name is Zulema Chavero, and can you hear me?
We can.
I'm sorry. My name is Zulema Chavero, and I'm a community organizer with the Workers Center of Somos Un Pueblo Unido. Thank you for having us today. As all of us know, workers are facing many challenges coming back to work. And our Workers Center is conducting a survey among immigrant workers in Santa Fe about these challenges. In addition to this survey, we have received key information from our immigrant community in general and from the different groups of workers that we have organized in the coronavirus era. I would like to share a little bit of what we've heard so far. Immigrant workers have a lack of information about safety and health. Also, they lack information about the COVID-19 test. They are not getting enough information about what to do in case they get a positive test, a positive result in a test. In many cases, there is no training available on the new way of working and keeping themselves safe. Some workers don't even have safety equipment. There is a lack of information about the rights coming back to work in the coronavirus era. Many of them are concerned about not getting paid sick leave and about retaliation for complaining about their working conditions. They are afraid of losing their work, their jobs. Many workers have been affected by wage theft, layoffs, resubmitting documentation to go back to work with their same employer, reduction of wages, cut off working hours, and retaliation. Employers must allow their employees to wash their hands as many times as necessary, provide masks, provide enough space to keep social distance at work, etc. The restaurants are allowing their customers to enter without a mask just because they want their business, but they are putting workers and their families at risk. Essential workers need protections. The recommendations that the OSHA and the CDC have issued are not mandatory. Right now, we have to rely on whatever the employer decides to do. A few days ago, we got a call from a worker. He said that he was leaving work, getting in his car, when his employer saw him taking off his mask. At that moment, the employer approached him and told him that he was going to charge him $50 fine, a $50 fine, for taking off the mask, and that the next time the fine would be $1,000. This employer took $50 out of this worker's check. We need leadership at the municipal level to regulate these situations. This is some of the information we wanted to share with you. And now one of our members, Gretel Barrita, will tell you about the challenges her family has faced due to the pandemic. Thank you.
Greta, ¿nos oyes, Greta? ¿Puedes empezar tu
Sí, sí los escucho.
si quieres empezar?
Sí. Ok. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Gretel Barrita. Soy miembro del Centro de Trabajadores de Somos un Pueblo Unido. He vivido en Santa Fe por 12 años. Me desenvuelvo trabajando como cocinera y desde
Gretel, tu micrófono está apagado. Gretel, prende tu micrófono, por favor. Tienes que quitarle el mute a tu micrófono.
Ok. Perdón. ¿Me escuchan? Una disculpa.
Él sigue.
Ok. No sé hasta dónde me escucharon, pero pues he vivido aquí en Santa Fe por 12 años. Me desenvuelvo trabajando como cocinera y desde entonces mi familia y yo hemos trabajado muy duro para salir adelante. Desde trabajar 15 horas diarias y así poder lograr el sueño de comprar nuestra propia casa. A pesar de no tener un seguro social, pagando un costo más alto por adquirir una vivienda y, por supuesto, aportando a la economía de este país. Desafortunadamente, y debido a la pandemia del COVID-19, mi familia y yo sufrimos los estragos de esta pandemia. Nos quedamos sin trabajo por completo, sin poder recibir ayuda económica del gobierno, ningún estímulo, porque familias como la mía estamos desprotegidos. Durante toda esta situación se nos exigió que teníamos que dar el pago de la hipoteca de la casa, porque si no cumplíamos con el pago de la hipoteca de nuestra casa, nuestro historial crediticio sería afectado. Y sabemos lo importante que es tener un buen crédito en este país. Mi familia y yo tuvimos que arriesgarnos a buscar trabajo durante esta pandemia, sin conseguir éxito alguno. Hubo un momento en el que mi familia y yo tuvimos que decidir entre comer o pagar la hipoteca y ver que nuestro sueño se empezara a derrumbar. A lo que yo me pregunto es por qué si mi familia y yo hemos sido unas personas muy trabajadoras, teniendo 2 trabajos desde hace 12 años y cumpliendo en tiempo y forma con el pago de nuestros impuestos, nos hemos quedado desamparados en esta terrible situación. Hace 2 semanas, mi esposo se enfrentó al robo de salario, haciéndolo trabajar de 30 a 35 horas por semana y solo recibiendo un pago semanal de $200. Mi esposo pidió una explicación y lo único que recibió fue esta contestación de parte del dueño. Es lo único que se le puede pagar y si no le gusta, es la puerta, está la puerta y puede irse. De verdad que necesitamos de la ayuda y el apoyo de quienes pueden cambiar el rumbo de nuestra nación. Que se pongan la mano en el corazón y nos ayuden con información, estímulos económicos, porque solo somos personas honestas trabajando para sacar adelante a nuestras familias. Muchas gracias. Le paso la voz a mi compañera Rayos.
Gracias. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rayos Burciaga. Soy organizadora comunitaria en el Centro de Trabajadores de Somos un Pueblo Unido. Durante la época de la pandemia, el Centro de Trabajadores de Somos hemos trabajado fuertemente para informar a la comunidad y a los trabajadores sobre sus derechos y recursos en la comunidad. Hemos extendiendo la información sobre recursos disponibles a nuestra comunidad a través de Facebook Lives, llamadas y mensajes de texto, proporcionando información en español sobre desempleo y ayuda en el proceso de aplicación. Impulsamos al Estado para que la información importante sea dada en español, como el informe de la gobernadora y traducciones. Informamos sobre derechos de trabajadores en la pandemia por medio de la radio, temas como robo de salario, discriminación, días de enfermedad pagado. Estamos siguiendo también sugiriendo recomendaciones para oficiales a nivel local y estatal sobre trabajadores esenciales. Estamos trabajando con la gobernadora para promover las pruebas gratuitas sobre COVID-19. Gracias. Marcela tiene más información sobre esto.
Gracias, Rayos. Thank you, Rayos. So we did want to talk a little bit about our effort with the Department of Health and the governor's office to do outreach, not just in Santa Fe, but other parts of the state, targeting vulnerable communities that have high health disparities, such as refugees and immigrants. There are other communities that they're also targeting with information and COVID-19 testing events. There are, as you know, and as Zulema mentioned, a lot of misconceptions about testing. Does it cost? Some people have been charged. Is it confidential? Is it private? Do people, what happens if you test positive? If you're quarantined for 3 weeks, how are you going to make ends meet? So part of our task is to really help dispel some of those myths, learn where people are at when it comes to, as essential workers, when it comes to testing, because it's such an important tool for our communities to keep ourselves safe, to keep our families safe, to promote public health, as we reopen our city. So we've teamed up with the Department of Health and other community partners, including the city of Santa Fe, to promote some testing events. We don't have the dates yet for the testing events that we're going to do, but we're likely to do them in some school parking lots in different parts of the city, and we're going to stress that it's free, it's confidential, it's safe, and that you don't need to have status, that your information isn't going to be sent to the Trump administration, either whether you're positive or negative, and also that you don't need insurance coverage. It's also really important for us to promote in the community a really important piece, which is if you don't have insurance and you do have COVID and you do require hospitalization, the state will find resources for you not to have to pay for your care in relation to that. These are the promises that have been made to us as we promote this by the administration. And so we just thought it was important for you to know that, and that we are teaming up to do that. A big key piece of reopening and keeping essential workers safe. One of the other things that we would like to emphasize is that in the surveys that we've done, most immigrant essential workers do not know that if their employer asks them to be tested and take a day off, or if they're symptomatic in the workplace and they're sent home and asked to be tested and stay at home until they get their results, the employer by federal law has to provide them, they have to pay them for those days through sick leave, and they will be reimbursed by the federal government when they do their taxes. And that is really important for workers to know, but it's really important. We exhort, I don't know if Randy is still on the call, it's really important that employers know that as well, because that is a really big barrier for our communities when they are so hard up and really having a hard time making ends meet because of the lack of unemployment and relief in these last few months. So that's kind of where we are. On Friday, we will be with the Department of Health doing a Facebook Live, 15-minute Facebook Live, like the 9 that we did with the City of Santa Fe, about all questions in relation to testing. What is the process like? Why is it important to continue to promote public health and also protect our families and our workplaces? What's the recommended frequency? It sounds like the administration is interested in continuing to do what's called surveillance testing. You probably all know this. I know Councilor Romero Worth, you do, because I've been on some of the same calls as you, to really be able to provide testing on an ongoing basis for immigrant essential workers and other immigrant vulnerable families in our communities. So this is what we're doing. This flyer is in English, but the whole thing will be in Spanish, and it's going to be on Friday, June 19th at 5 p.m. And so it'd be great if the city could help promote that as well. In conclusion, and then if anybody wants to have questions of any of the folks that are on the call, we just really want to emphasize that what we are pushing for and what we need our city allies to push for, and some of you have already signed on to a sign-on letter of local elected officials, thank you, is that we need to include cash assistance, stimulus funding to mixed status families in future federal relief legislation. We also support providing funding to cities and counties with less than 500,000, because we know that that'll help free up money at the local level to continue to bolster programs like Santa Fe Connect, which are so important for all families, not just immigrant families. So the HEROES Act contains these provisions, which is great. The HEROES Act passed the House, but obviously we expect without a massive effort across the country that those will be stripped out of any Senate version if the Senate ever takes those up. And so we are doing as much advocacy as we can, but really it would be great for cities and counties to also advocate in the name of their immigrant constituents and in the name of their economic recovery effort. The other issue that we want to bring to your attention is that we need cash relief. We need cash assistance. Everybody who has status and who doesn't live in mixed status families got their 3,400 más o menos funding and to be able to help bolster the financial budgets of their families. We did not. Right now, there's a real emphasis both at the state level and at the city and county level, frankly, for lots of different reasons, for rental assistance, utility assistance, and mortgage assistance. All of those things are fine. However, we're getting a lot of folks who are calling us who we've sent to the Santa Fe Connect program. Vulnerable populations, including undocumented immigrants, people who don't have social security numbers, people who don't have, maybe have had felonies on their records, people who've had really poor credit scores. These are the folks that often enter into very informal relationships with their landlords. And so we've had a number of people contacting us and saying, look, the city and the county, they're saying that we can get rental assistance or LifeLink or HomeWise, but for mortgage assistance, but with rental assistance, our landlords don't want to fill out the paperwork because they're not paying taxes on their rentals. And so that's why rental assistance is great for whom it works, but for those who it doesn't work for, we really need to be able to give folks cash assistance. We know there's no money at the city level, but we are working with the administration to identify ways of using CARES Act money and using general assistance program funding to help the neediest folks who qualified for no other relief and who also experience great reductions in income. Any support and help in that effort on behalf of the cities and our economic recovery efforts would be really, really helpful. We also clearly need more critical information in Spanish. Earlier in the meeting, someone talked about the Paycheck Protection Act. The truth is there's still, and this is across the board, not just for Spanish speakers, there are a lot of immigrant business owners that we've talked to who don't necessarily understand the program, don't know, especially if they're ITIN business owners. And so any additional support that the city can give to immigrant business owners would be great. And obviously, folks talked about more protections for essential workers. We want to believe, and for the most part, it's true that if these are not obligatory regulations around PPE, around health and safety on the job, that people are going to step up and do it. But we need to make sure that for those that don't, there are things in place that the city can do to help encourage that. And if that doesn't work, eventually we think that it's going to have to be mandated, because the Trump administration certainly isn't doing that. So that is the information that we have. We have a lot of this information on our website. We have a COVID-19 resource page on our website. You should all go to it and get more information. And with that, I'm going to stop share. And if you have any comments or questions, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to share this information with you all.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Muchas gracias. I'm sorry the hour is late, but I do think we have a couple questions for you, and I'll just start with Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank all of you individually for being with us. The Somosistas are strong in Santa Fe, and I really appreciate that you all let us know what's happening in the community and to be informed, and that you share your lived experiences with us. It's very, very important to me and to my colleagues. I know it's late and we went way longer in this meeting than we anticipated, but I just had a couple questions for anybody that can share. Was just curious, we have this moratorium on evictions, and I was wondering if the eviction issues have been arising as a result of the pandemic, and if there's any anecdotal information you can give us, and if there's what has happened, like how, if you've heard of stories, how people have been following up with that.
So Rayos might be able to answer this, or Zulema or Maria. What I know based on what folks have been, the calls that we've been fielding, is that people are calling now saying, I owe 3 months worth of rent and I didn't have to pay it, but now I do. What do I do? And so we anticipate that now and in the future is when we'll start to see a lot more of the eviction issues arise. And again, unfortunately, if you do not have a social security number or legal status, there aren't that many legal resources through things like legal aid to help you fight those evictions. And so, and I know that there are other efforts in town to help provide legal support, but this may become a really big problem as we enter into the fall.
Thank you for that information. I'm feeling like that's going to be the next wave of the issues that we're going to be encountering as it relates to housing insecurity and situations with a lot of different community members. So I just want to flag that and try to figure out where our city attorneys fit into this. And I don't know the answer right now, but just wanted to flag that. The other issue, I don't know if it's an issue, but I'm just curious your thoughts. You may know that we passed the resolution for the mask or face covering ordinance, requiring masks. And, I think people are still, we need to do a better job communicating that regulation. What I'm curious about is how the mask requirement affects workers and having to be all day in a mask. And I want to make sure that if there's some way to communicate to employers that staff people employees have to have a time given to be able to take a break, to take off a mask. It's just not feasible for someone to be wearing a mask all day. And I don't know if there are health implications if you're wearing all the time without a break. So I guess I'm more curious about the break aspect, and if you all have been hearing anything about that and what we can do to help with that.
So Zulema, you talked about some of our recommendations for essential workers. I know that there's a grocery store ordinance in relation to taking frequent breaks. One of the things that, and I don't believe we've connected it to the mask issue in the way that you have, Counselor. But taking frequent breaks to be able to wash hands is something that is not obligatory right now, and yet this is something that people, this is CDC guidelines that are not obligatory, and no one's making them obligatory in the state of New Mexico yet, or in our city or our county. And so we do have a list of essential worker recommendations that includes social distancing, not having to use necessarily the same equipment, things like that. What I can say about the mask, well, not the mask ordinance, but a lot of folks, when people are coming in without masks, it is important that people, it's important for a lot of our members not to have to be the ones to enforce it. And so you can go to one grocery store, for instance, or restaurant, and it's the management is enforcing it. And then you go to another and it's not. And we understand why they may not want to enforce it, because they want business, but it's really hard for employees to constantly be asking people and putting themselves in that position. And so that's some of the feedback that we've gotten. Zulema, did you want to add anything to the essential worker piece? You're muted, Zulema.
No, Marcela, I think you said the most important part of this, and and about the masks, none of these recommendations are mandatory. That's why we are letting you know what it means for workers not to have regulations on these kind of situations. Like I said, we got this call from this worker, and he really didn't know when to take off the mask or when to keep it on. So there's nothing. We just rely on whatever the employer decides to do, and unfortunately, workers have to follow that lead.
I guess I just want to know if there's something the city can do with that. It is confusing, and employers, I think, don't even know in some cases, and some do know, and they're just taking advantage of the situation. So if you all could just let us know maybe later on, if you think about it, how we can help with that. Because I think it's important to wear masks and also be able to take breaks from masks, and also know that the employees should not have to enforce the mask ordinance. You're absolutely right. So thank you all for your time, and I'll yield the computer screen.
Thank you. Are there other questions from counselors? I know it's late.
No question, Madam Chair, but just want to thank the presenters, Marcela, and all the Somos presenters. Thank you so much. Great information.
Counselor Rivera, you're unmuted. Did you want to?
Yeah, just same thing. Thank you to Marcela and Somos Un Pueblo Unido for, again, I've spoken with you before. I understand the issues. I wish we had the money now to help out. Marcela, I did want to know if you're asking the state for anything during the special session, and if there's anything we can do to support that through a resolution.
So thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera. We have been we've identified a program within the state, which is, and it's not just for immigrant workers. It's I mean, a lot of immigrant workers and families don't have access to federal relief and unemployment, but there are other very low income people in the Latino community, Hispano community, Native American community that are in the same straits. And so we've developed a proposal that we've been working on with the administration, being able to use CARES Act money or being able to swap out money for cash assistance and for relief directly to immigrant families and non-immigrant families who didn't. And so it is, for the most part, immigrant-based organizations, Voices for Children, and advocates. And so part of doing this kind of work is to really have new voices and new advocates advocating at the state level. And so, you know, the legislature doesn't have, apparently, general fund money to give to programs like this right now. So it really is incumbent on both legislators and the administration to really think through, and we're helping with this, to think through where funding can come from for people who are the neediest and who did not receive any federal relief or unemployment and saw dramatic reductions of income. And it's, you know, it's not an astronomical number. And so there are proposals right now, and what the city could do to help is pass a resolution, is directly advocate as counselors and as commissioners with the administration, saying this impacts our families and it impacts the children in our families. These could have generational impacts, but it also, you know, that's enough, but it also impacts our ability as a city to recover and to have a really successful economic recovery, along with all of the other things that the city is doing to try to promote that through the business, through the reopening of the businesses.
Right, thank you. When you have some language in place of what you're actually putting forward, get that to us. I'm sure we would all be interested in something like that. If you can't get a hold of me, I'm sure any of the other counselors would be willing to bring it forward. So thanks again, appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much for sticking with us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your stories. And if there are no other questions, I believe we are through our agenda, and we will adjourn.
I just wanted to add my thanks as well, real fast. And second time I had the opportunity to speak with this group, and I once again gleaned new information. So thank you again so much. I really do appreciate it.
Sorry, Councilor Casas-Sanchez, didn't mean to leave you off there. All right, with that, thank you. Have a good evening.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Garcia.
We forgot item 8 and 9.
Oops. See, and I already shut my book.
It's matters from
you.
staff.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Matters from the chair, matters from staff, and matters from
thank you. Matters from staff. Jennifer, do you have anything for us?
I do not. Just echo my thanks to Somos.
Great. Matters from the committee? Great. Matters from the chair? Oh, we have a matter from the committee. Yes, Councilor Rivera.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I was wondering if the chair would be willing. So the public safety has had a hard time coming together over the last couple months. Some of the members aren't very up to date with Zoom or technology in general, and so we haven't been able to really meet. And they're really the issue around the police and maybe presenting, having them present maybe the starts of maybe what they do and some of their policies and how it's been affected by the things in our nation over the last couple of weeks. And if I can get together with Chief Padilla, would you be open to allowing them to make a presentation at the beginning of a meeting?
Yeah, let's talk about that. we're going to be looking at the agenda, I believe next week. So let's get together and figure out what would be good for that.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, other matters from the committee? All right, with that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you all. Really appreciate good conversation, and sorry we went 3 hours tonight. We'll try to, we keep trying to massage this, trying to get it into a 2-hour block, but I think it was a good meeting nonetheless. So thank you all. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.